Do you really want a ditch? Bob asked, confused. A really, really big one? Even bigger, I said back. Like something from a castle. Something to keep people out. Bob smiled wide. I get it, he said, laughing a little. When can we get started? My peaceful backyard, normally a place of blue water and kids laughing in the swimming pool, was ruined by a single, colorful paper. It was stuck on my mailbox, bright orange against my pretty flowers. Important notice, it said in big letters. No more swimming pools allowed. I grabbed the paper, feeling worried. No pools? That's crazy. My pool, a shiny, happy place, had been in my yard for a long time. It wasn't just a pool. It was where we had summer parties, where the neighborhood kids played, and where my family had fun. It was my pool, clean and pretty, if I do say so myself. I read the paper again, getting more and more confused. The Homeowners Association, HOA, led by a new woman named Karen McMean, yes, that Karen, had decided that pools were ugly and made too much noise. They were, the paper said, not what we want in our neighborhood. I laughed out loud. Too much noise? My pool had helped the neighborhood. It was a place where everyone came together and had fun. What was wrong with that? But the small print was even worse. The new rule wasn't just about stopping new pools. It meant everyone had to get rid of their pools. Homeowners had 30 days to remove them or pay a lot of money every day. If you don't do this, the paper warned, we will take you to court. I read the paper again, feeling angry. This was so unfair. My perfect pool, which had been there for years, was now called ugly by a bossy HOA president who didn't like anything that wasn't her idea of perfect. It was all about power, a way to control people and make Karen happy. And I knew it was an attack on me. My pool, my favorite thing, was now Karen's target. Looking at the bright orange paper and thinking about the unfair pool rule, I started to smile. Karen McMean wanted my pool gone? Okay. She wanted everyone to get along? Even better. I'd make sure she wouldn't forget it. If I couldn't have a pool, well, I'd have to do something bigger. Much, much bigger. The idea, silly and wonderful, popped into my head. A moat. A huge, amazing moat, all around my property. It was perfect. It was silly. It was exactly what Karen deserved. The next morning, full of coffee and with a big smile, I started making my plan. First, I needed a construction crew. I found a local company, Bob's Big Diggers, known for being quiet and doing strange jobs. I met with Bob, a big man who always looked like he was about to laugh. So, you want a trench? Bob asked with confusion on his face. Much, much bigger than a trench, I replied. Think medieval times. Think a wall but made of water. Bob's started to smile and said, now we're talking. When do we get going? The digging started the next week. The giant digger rolled into my yard, taking out huge amounts of dirt. My neighbors watched, wondering what was going on. Even Karen, who sometimes drove by in her fancy white car, looked confused. What's he doing now? I heard her ask someone, probably another bossy HOA person. Some kind of garden? Looks like a rock garden, the other person said, sounding like they didn't believe it. A very big rock garden, Karen said, sounding annoyed. I just smiled and waved, letting them think it was just a weird garden project. Let them think I was just moving dirt around. They had no idea. The hole got wider and deeper, going all around my house like a big hug. It was amazing to see. A giant hole in the ground that showed what was coming. And then the water. I paid a water truck to fill the hole, turning it from a ditch into a shiny, watery moat. The HOA, when they realized what I was doing, went crazy. "A asterisk moat?" Karen yelled, her voice loud across the new water. "You've built a moat. This is crazy. This is ugly." "Ugly?" I said, pretending to be confused. I think it's very nice, don't you? It makes the yard look better. Karen couldn't speak, her face turning purple. This breaks the rules. Of something? We'll find a rule. We'll find lots of rules. Good luck, Karen, I said, smiling, because I think this is just a very big, very pretty, natural pond. The moat wasn't just a big hole filled with water. It was a carefully planned, silly place. I put in lots of fish-colorful koi, goldfish, even little guppies, making a bright underwater world. Lily pads, some real and some fake, floated on top, making it look pretty, and making Karen even angrier. And, of course, every moat needs a drawbridge, a huge, fancy drawbridge, with a crank and a loud creaking sound when it went down. It was completely useless, totally silly, and absolutely perfect. The moat was huge. It wasn't just a small ditch, it was like a lake, surrounding my house like a castle. It was so big, I thought about getting a small boat. The silliness of it was the whole point. It was a picture of Karen's crazy rules, made even bigger and more ridiculous. Karen and the HOA, of course, were furious. They came to my property like angry bees, their faces red with anger. "This is crazy!" Karen yelled, pointing at the moat. "You can't just build a moat. It's dangerous. It's not what we want." "Dangerous?" I said, pretending to be worried. "No way, Karen. It's perfectly safe. Look!" I pointed to a sign I'd put up near the drawbridge. "Be careful, deep water. Don't feed the fish." "Fish?" Karen yelled. "There are fish in there. What about sharks?" "Sharks?" I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, that hurts. I would never put such noisy creatures in our nice neighborhood. Not yet, anyway." But the moat," Karen said, shaking. "It's against the rules. We'll find a rule. We'll use every single rule if we have to." "Good luck," I said, taking out a big folder full of papers. "Because I think this is just a very big, very pretty, natural pond." I explained, very slowly, how the moat followed every single HOA landscaping rule. I talked about rules about natural ponds, water storage, and stopping dirt from washing away. I even showed them a report from a pond expert, a friend of mine who likes to make things up, who said the moat was important for the local animals. Karen and the HOA board members looked at the papers, their faces confused and surprised. They were stuck. They couldn't argue with the papers. They couldn't say it wasn't a natural pond, and they couldn't say I was breaking any rules. I had won. And to make it even worse, I hired workers to build pretty stone walls around the moat. They weren't just any stone walls. They looked nice, were perfectly straight, and looked very expensive. "Making the neighborhood look good," I whispered to myself, smiling. It was the perfect final touch, a silly thing that made Karen completely crazy. It's beautiful," she yelled, her voice full of anger. "It's too beautiful. It's making fun of us." "Making fun of you?" I pretended to be innocent. "Karen, I'm just trying to make the neighborhood nicer, don't you think? It makes the yard look better." The HOA's reaction to the moat was, well, explosive. Their anger spread through the neighborhood, getting worse at their special meeting. I could almost feel the heat coming from their perfect, rule-filled office. They met like they were planning a war, figuring out how to fight my watery creation. I imagined Karen, red-faced and yelling, hitting her hammer and demanding that I drain my moat. But their attempts to find a way, a rule, anything that could make me get rid of my wonderful creation failed. My natural pond was perfect. They were trapped by their own rules, the same rules they used to control others. Their helplessness was wonderful, but I wasn't happy just tricking them. I wanted to make it even sillier. That's where the "Beware Live Sharks" signs came in. I put these scary signs around the moat with pictures of cartoon sharks in big red letters. The signs, of course, were fake. The moat was only filled with harmless koi, guppies, and goldfish. But the HOA, especially Karen, was already scared. Just the idea of sharks made them panic. "Sharks?" I heard Karen yell to another HOA member during her usual drive-by. "He's put sharks in the moat? That's it. This has gone too far." "But are there really sharks?" the other HOA member asked, sounding nervous. "Of course there are sharks," Karen said. "He's trying to scare us. He thinks he's so smart." Karen, scared and wanting to catch me doing something wrong, decided to do something herself. She came to my property, wearing her fancy suit, which seemed a bit much for looking at a moat, but whatever, wanting to check the moat herself. I watched from my window, drinking hot chocolate, because what's a little revenge without a warm drink? As Karen carefully walked to the drawbridge. She looked over the edge, her nose almost touching the water, looking for any sign of sharks. "There's nothing there," she said to herself, sounding sad. "He's lying?" Just as she stood up, sure that there were no sharks, the drawbridge, which I might have made a little loose earlier, broke with a loud creak. Karen, surprised, yelled and fell headfirst into the moat. The splash was amazing. I stopped myself from laughing as I watched her come up, wet and covered in water plants. The koi, scared by the sudden noise, swam away. Karen, covered in lily pads and fish slime, looked less like a scary HOA president and more like a swamp monster. The security camera, of course, caught everything. It was a moment that would be famous. I couldn't have planned it better. Karen's surprise swim was the funny part, but the real masterpiece of revenge was still to come. The "Beware Live Sharks" signs, which were a trick at first, now needed, well, sharks. I wasn't going to put wild, people-eating sharks in my moat. That would be bad, and a bit too much even for me. Instead, I did something more normal. I called a place that takes care of rescued animals. After a surprisingly easy time, apparently Moat owner is a good enough reason to get sharks, I became the owner of 3 small, calm sharks. They were about the size of big cats, more interested in lying in the sun and eating fish than causing trouble. They were also, importantly, legally my sharks, with all the papers to prove it. The HOA, naturally, went even crazier when they found out about the real sharks in my moat. Their fear, which started with my signs, had become real. They came to my property again, this time with police officers. "He's done it!" Karen yelled, pointing at the sharks, which were peacefully lying on a floating log. "He's actually put sharks in the moat! This is dangerous! Arrest him!" The police officers, looking even more confused than before, came to me carefully. "Mr. Jamie," the older officer said, sounding amused and annoyed. "We got a complaint about sharks." "Yes, officer," I said calmly. "My sharks. Would you like to see their adoption papers?" I showed them the papers, with pictures of my sharks and stamps from the animal place. The officers looked at the papers, their faces changing from worried to surprised. "These sharks are legally yours?" the younger officer asked, clearly having a hard time believing it. "Yes," I said. "They're fully licensed, and as you can see," I pointed to the moat, "they live in a legally called natural pond. It's all perfectly legal." Karen couldn't speak, her face turning red. But, sharks! In a neighborhood! It's crazy." The older officer sighed. "Ma'am, I understand you're worried. But Mr. Jamie has all the papers, and as long as the sharks stay in the moat, we can't legally take them away." He turned to me, smiling a little. "Just try to keep them fed, Mr. Jamie," he said. "We don't want any problems." "Of course, officer," I said, keeping a straight face. They really like fish." The police officers, shaking their heads in disbelief, went back to their cars. Karen and the other HOA members were left standing by the moat, their faces angry, frustrated, and confused. They had been tricked, outsillied, and beaten at every turn. Their power, their control, their perfect world of rules had been completely destroyed by a moat, some fish, and a few legally adopted sharks. It was almost too much to believe, and I, standing on my drawbridge, looking at my moat and my sharks, couldn't help but smile. The HOA was stuck. Their rules, made to control every part of life, had become their own problem. They couldn't make me pay for the pool. It was gone because of their own silly rule. They couldn't make me pay for the moat. It was a natural pond, a legal part of my yard, and they couldn't make me pay for the sharks. They were legally adopted, allowed, and living in their legally called natural pond. They had trapped themselves, tricked and beaten at every turn. Their power, once so strong, was gone, leaving them helpless against my amazing moat. The neighborhood, on the other hand, loved the moat. It wasn't just a moat. It was something to see, something to talk about, a sign of fighting against the HOA's control. Children laughed as they watched the sharks lie in the sun, their small bodies adding something special to the neighborhood. Neighbors gathered on my drawbridge, talking, laughing, and enjoying the show. My house, once just another normal house, had become the coolest house, a source of pride and something that annoyed the HOA all the time. And then there was the Moat party. It was a huge party, a celebration of my win over the HOA, and a big neighborhood get-together. I put lights around the moat, played loud music, and had enough food and drinks for everyone. Everyone was invited. Except, of course, the HOA board. They watched from their office windows, angry and jealous, as the sounds of laughter and fun filled the neighborhood. The Moat party was more than just a party. It was a sign of my win. It was a way of saying that I had won, that I had turned their silly rules into a joke, and that I had taken back my right to have fun in my own backyard. It was also a way to thank my neighbors for their help, for hating the HOA's rules, and for being willing to enjoy the silliness of it all. The moat, once a sign of fighting, had become a sign of friendship, a place where everyone was welcome, except, of course, the HOA board. They were alone, unwanted, and completely beaten. Their power was gone, leaving them on their island of rules, while the rest of the neighborhood celebrated in the moat-lit glow of my win. The final blow to Karen was, funnily enough, because of her own mistake. The security camera video of her falling into the moat, her surprise swim, and her coming out covered in fish slime had become famous. It was everywhere. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, even TikTok was full of pictures of Karen as the moat monster, the lily pad princess, and the queen of the swamp. The picture of her wet, her suit ruined, her pride gone was just too good. The embarrassment was complete. Karen, once the feared and respected, or at least obeyed, HOA president, had become a joke, a sign of too much power brought down by her own silliness. She couldn't show her face in the neighborhood without being laughed at. The HOA meetings became funny, with people openly making fun of her and saying her most ridiculous words. It was too much. Karen, already upset from the public laughter and the HOA's complete loss, finally quit. Her quitting letter, short and angry, blamed personal reasons and bad feelings in the neighborhood for her leaving. But everyone knew the truth. Karen McMean had been beaten, not by force, but by a moat, some sharks, and the power of the internet. And to make it even worse, I, happy from my win and full of silly ideas, decided to do even more. I paid for a tiki bar to be built. Not just any tiki bar, but a floating tiki bar with a grass roof, colorful chairs, and a bartender who made tropical drinks. It was in the middle of the moat, and you could only get to it by a small, equally ridiculous rowboat. It was the final act of defiance, a big showy way of saying I win to the HOA and their rules. They couldn't touch me. They couldn't make me pay. They couldn't even complain. I had tricked them, outmaneuvered them, and out-sillied them at every turn. My moat, once a sign of fighting, had become a sign of freedom, a showing of the power of creative silliness. From that day on, no HOA rule was ever used against me again. The moat stayed, a shining, shark-filled paradise in the middle of the suburbs. It became a legend, a story told and retold in the neighborhood, a reminder that even the most controlling bullies can be beaten by a well-made moat and a good sense of humor. And I, the once picked-on homeowner, became a local hero, the Moat Master, the one who dared to fight the queen of suburban control and won. The whole thing, while annoying at first, had been surprisingly fun. And as I drank a tropical drink on my floating tiki bar, watching the sharks swim in the sun, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes a moat is just a moat, and sometimes it's so much more. The neighborhood changed after the Great Moat Battle, as it became known. People were less afraid of the HOA, more willing to bend the rules, within reason, of course. Nobody wanted another moat, except maybe for me. I was toying with the idea of a second, smaller moat, just for ducks. There was a sense of community that hadn't been there before, a shared understanding that sometimes a little bit of rebellion is a good thing. The annual neighborhood picnic, formerly a stiff and formal affair overseen by Karen with an iron fist and a clipboard full of regulations, became a much more relaxed event. People brought what they wanted, wore what they wanted, and generally had a good time without worrying about breaking some obscure rule about napkin color or acceptable noise levels. The fear was gone, replaced by a spirit of fun and camaraderie. Even the HOA itself underwent a transformation. The remaining board members, realizing they were on the verge of being completely overthrown, started to loosen their grip. They held fewer meetings, sent out fewer threatening letters, and generally tried to stay out of everyone's way. The once feared acronym, HOA, became more of a joke than a threat. People would whisper, "Don't tell the HOA," with a wink and a smile, knowing that the organization's power had been significantly diminished. My house, with its infamous moat and floating tiki bar, became a local landmark. People would drive by just to take pictures, and on weekends there was often a small crowd gathered near the drawbridge, hoping to catch a glimpse of the sharks. I even started offering moat tours on Saturdays, guiding small groups around the perimeter in a ridiculously oversized inflatable swan. Another addition that drove the remnants of the HOA to the brink of madness. The tours were free, of course, but I did accept donations for shark food, which actually went towards maintaining the moat and buying increasingly elaborate tiki bar decorations. The sharks, surprisingly, became local celebrities. They were named, of course, Finny, Chompy, and Bruce, a nod to a certain famous movie shark. They were surprisingly docile, spending most of their time basking in the sun or lazily swimming around the koi, who seemed remarkably unfazed by their presence. They were well-fed, well cared for, and surprisingly photogenic. They even had their own unofficial social media page, managed by a group of neighborhood kids who had become self-proclaimed shark keepers. As for Karen, she moved away shortly after her resignation. Rumor had it she'd relocated to a remote HOA-free community in the desert, where she could presumably live in peace, far away from any bodies of water larger than a puddle. I occasionally wondered if she ever saw the online memes, the Moat Monster videos, the endless jokes about her epic fall. I hoped she did. Not out of malice, but because I believed that even Karen, in her own way, could learn a lesson from the whole experience. A lesson about the importance of flexibility, the dangers of unchecked power, and the enduring power of a good, silly moat. And me? I continued to enjoy my moat, my sharks, and my newfound status as a neighborhood legend. I added new features to the moat over time. A small waterfall, a network of underwater lights, even a miniature pirate ship. For the sharks to play with, of course. The tiki bar became a regular gathering spot for neighbors, a place to share stories, laugh, and enjoy the absurdity of it all. The moat, in the end, was more than just a way to get back at a petty HOA president. It was a symbol of community, a testament to the power of creative resistance, and a constant reminder that sometimes the best way to deal with life's little annoyances is to build a moat, stock it with sharks, and invite everyone over for a party. And every once in a while, when I was feeling particularly mischievous, I'd order a new batch of Caution Live Shark signs just to keep everyone on their toes. You know, for neighborhood harmony.